Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the EVHS News Weekly. Today we have a special case down at the islands of St. Kitts and Nevis. According to our top reporters, we have found a new type of animal. Probably has a long Latin name for it, am I right? According to HQ, this little squeaker is called Sciurus vulgaris, and it's dying out. We can't have that. Well, Sciurus, so the good people of Nevis have decided to send some similar rodents of their own to help the Sciurus vulgaris get back on his feet. But they just can't mate with the Nevis species. I would personally take the mate on a date. Jokes aside, let's go down to the nation's famous reporter, EVHS Women's Weekly's hottest man, Shiraz Grewal.
Now we've got a problem down on this front with the economy. Negative impacts from tourism occur when the level of visitor use is greater than the environment's ability to cope with this use within the acceptable limits of change. Uncontrolled conventional tourism poses potential threats to many natural areas around the world. It can put enormous pressure on an area and lead to impacts such as soil erosion, increased pollution, discharges into the sea, natural habitat loss, increased pressure on endangered species, and heightened vulnerability to forest fires. It often puts a strain on water resources, and it can force local populations to compete for the use of critical resources. Depletion of natural resources is another point I'd like to bring across. Tourism development can put pressure on natural resources when it increases consumption in areas where resources are already scarce, such as water resources. Water, and especially fresh water, is one of the most crucial natural resources. The tourism industry generally overuses water resources for hotels, swimming pools, golf courses, and personal use of water by tourists in the island of St. Kitts. This can result in water shortages and degradation of water supplies, as well as generating a greater volume of wastewater. In drier regions like the island of St. Kitts, the issue of water scarcity is a particular concern. Because of the hot climate and the tendency of tourists to consume more water when on holiday than they do at home, the amount used can run up to 440 liters a day. This is almost double what the inhabitants of an average Spanish city use. Golf course maintenance can also deplete freshwater resources. In recent years, golf tourism has increased in popularity, and the number of golf courses has grown rapidly in the island of St. Kitts. Golf courses require an enormous amount of water every day, and as with the other causes of excessive extraction of water, this can result in water scarcity. If the water comes from wells, overpumping can cause saline intrusion into groundwater. Golf resorts are more and more situated in or near protected areas or areas where resources are limited, exacerbating their impacts. Tourism can create great pressure on local resources like energy, food, and other raw materials that may already be in short supply. Greater extraction and transportation of these resources exacerbates the physical impacts associated with their exploitation. Because of the seasonal character of the industry, many destinations have 10 times more inhabitants in the high season on these resources to meet the high expectations tourists often have, such as proper heating, hot water, and so on and so forth. Land degradation is also another point I'd like to bring across, such as important land resources include minerals, fossil fuels, fertile soil, forests, wetland, and wildlife. Increased construction of tourism and recreational facilities has increased the pressure on these resources and on scenic landscapes. Direct impact on natural resources, both renewable and non-renewable, in the provision of tourist facilities can be caused by the use of land for accommodation and other infrastructure provisioning in the use of building materials. Forests often suffer negative impacts of tourism in the form of deforestation caused by fuel, wood collection, and land clearing. For example, one trekking tourist in Nepal and also in the island of St. Kitts can use 4 to 5 kilograms of wood a day. Pollution is a huge point that is caused by tourism. Tourism can cause the same forms of pollution as any other industry: air emissions, noise, solid waste, and littering, releases of sewage, oil, and chemicals, even architectural and visual pollution. Air pollution and noise is a huge point. Transportation by air, road, and rail is continuously increasing. In response to the rising number, reported that the number of international air passengers worldwide rose from 88 million in 1972 to 344 million in 1994. One consequence of this increase in air transportation is that Tourism now accounts for more than 60% of air travel and is therefore responsible for an important share of air emissions. One study estimated that a single transatlantic return flight emits almost half the carbon dioxide emissions produced by all other sources, such as lighting, heating, car use, and so on and so forth, consumed by an average person yearly. Transportation emissions and emissions from energy production and use are linked to acid rain, global warming, and photochemical pollution. Air pollution from transportation has impacts on the global level, especially from tourism. Carbon dioxide emissions related to transportation and energy use. It can contribute to severe local air pollution. Some of these impacts are quite specific to tourist activities, for example, especially in very hot or cold countries. Tour buses often leave their motors running for hours while the tourists go out for an excursion because they want to return a comfortably air-conditioned bus. Noise pollution from airplanes, cars, and buses, as well as recreational vehicles such as snowmobiles and jet skis, is an issue. Air pollution and noise is a huge point. Transportation by air, road, and rail is continuously increasing in response to the rising number reported that the number of international air passengers worldwide rose from 88 million in 1972 to 344 million in 1994. One consequence of this increase in air transportation is that tourism now accounts for more than 60% of air travel and is therefore responsible for an important share of air emissions. One study estimated that a single transatlantic return flight emits almost half the carbon dioxide emissions produced by all other sources, such as lighting, heating, car use, and so on and so forth, consumed by an average person yearly. Transportation emissions and emissions from energy production and use are linked to acid rain, global warming, and photochemical pollution. Air pollution from transportation has impacts on the global level, especially from tourism. Carbon dioxide emissions related to transportation and energy use. It can contribute to severe local air pollution. Some of these impacts are quite specific to tourist activities, for example, especially in very hot or cold countries. Tour buses often leave their motors running for hours while the tourists go out for an excursion because they want to return a comfortably air-conditioned bus. Noise pollution from airplanes, cars, and buses, as well as recreational vehicles such as snowmobiles and jet skis, is an ever-growing problem of modern life. In addition to causing annoyance, stress, and even hearing loss for humans, it causes distress to wildlife, especially in sensitive areas. For instance, noise generated by snowmobiles can cause animals to alter their natural activity patterns. Another point is solid waste and littering, and this is a huge point, and it is also in areas with high concentration of tourist activities and appealing natural attractions. Waste disposal is a serious problem, and improper disposal can be a major despoiler of the natural environment, such as rivers, scenic areas, and roadsides, which are all found in the island of St. Kitts. For example, cruise ships in the island of St. Kitts are estimated to produce more than 70,000 tons of waste each year. Today, some cruise lines are actively working to reduce waste-related impacts. Solid waste and littering can degrade the physical appearance of the water and shoreline and cause the death of marine animals. In mountain areas, trekking tourists generate a great deal of waste. Tourists on expedition leave behind their garbage, oxygen cylinders, and even camping equipment. Such practices degrade the environment with all the detritus typical of the developed world. In remote areas that have few garbage collection or disposal facilities, some trails in the island of St. Kitts visited by tourists have been nicknamed Coca-Cola Trail and Toilet Paper Trail. Another point is sewage. Construction of hotels, recreation, and other facilities often lead to increased sewage pollution. Wastewater has polluted seas and lakes surrounding tourist attractions and damaging the flora and fauna. Sewage runoff causes serious damage to coral reefs because it stimulates the growth of algae, which cover the filter-feeding corals, hindering their ability to survive. Changes in salinity and siltation can have wide-ranging impacts on coastal environments, and sewage pollution can create the health of humans and animals. Scientists have apparently attempted to recover St. Kitts rodents population with Nevis's rodents, but ended in failure every time. Turns out the two are actually their own species, which explains why they aren't able to mate.
Now we know how us humans and tourism affect this poor species. Just because you like cute fuzzy animals doesn't mean that you should kill them off. You might not know it, but you could be killing them all. Let's talk about the environment. We now take you to our Nobel Prize winner, environmentalist Juna.
Right, so it looks like the rodents on St. Kitts and the rodents on Nevis became geographically isolated over time with some heavy changes to the environment. What used to be one species eventually evolved into the two rodents we found today on these two islands. Populations of this ancestral species probably got pushed out to either island and adapted to their new area. The rodents at St. Kitts seem to have food sources at higher places, as suggested by their limb length and leap height. These stand at 7.8 centimeters for the hind limb length and 4.2 centimeters for forelimb length, while their average leap height is 1.4 meters. The island is known to have forested areas, where the rodents live. On the other hand, Nevis rodents have shorter limbs and leap height, which shows that they don't have to reach as high for food. Their hind limbs and forelimbs are 4.2 and 3.9 centimeters respectively, and their average height for leaping is 0.4 meters. These are much shorter than those of St. Kitts, allowing us to believe their food sources are closer to the ground. Nevis Island has shrublands which attest to their food sources location. Depending on each island's environment, each population of rodents adapted accordingly. In the past, however, the islands were most likely one landmass that separated over time due to factors such as continental drift. The islands are still fairly similar in terms of climate, so the other changes to each rodent remain subtle. Time skip. Alright, so what I forgot to mention earlier in the day was that mutations are an important factor to the evolution of these rodents. The red squirrels on St. Kitts required longer limbs to leap higher than their old average measurement, so this is where natural selection plays in. Through the process of directional selection, the red squirrels who had the genes for longer limbs would be able to survive better than those who had average or shorter limbs. The shorter rodents would not be able to reach their food as successfully as the ones with longer limbs. Mutations come into this process by passing on abnormal genes that would rather benefit the animal to its environment than hinder it. Now, coming in through a biologist's standpoint, prezygotic reproductive isolation eventually led Cirrus vulgaris unable to mate with one another after a long period of time. For example, the table indicates that the two species have different gestation periods and also different times spent in courtship display. Just the times themselves imply that behavioral isolation has taken place, rendering the two populations unable to interbreed. As this continued over the years, the two populations of rodents emerged as two different species, though they are closely related. Now, since the original species has split into two, we will classify this change as macroevolution. It has not occurred within a single population and rather took place in two locations, leading to a larger scale change than what microevolution would change in a species.
Thanks, Juna, but even though we now know about geographic isolation, I feel like this puzzle has one more piece left. And yep, we have her on the line. I now present a biologist who has spent years investigating St. Kitts and Nevis, Vanessa.
Thanks, Rachel. It seems like the rodents of St. Kitts adapted to have longer limbs, which therefore gave them both speed and ability to leap higher than those on Nevis Island. As you can see on the table here, the average forelimb for St. Kitts has a measurement of 4.2 centimeters, while the average measurement for the forelimb of Nevis Island has the measurement of 3.9 centimeters. Now, the reason for St. Kitts to have much more of a, longer centimeters is because the food sources are on higher ground than those on Nevis, who don't have much mobility. And also because the predators could have possibly kill the slower rodents and keeping the faster ones to survive. Now, there have some other differences too that have resulted over time through evolution, as you can see on this table here. For example, we'll look at the average measurement of hind limb for St. Kitts, which is 7.8, versus Nevis's rodents' average measurement of hind limb, which is 4.2 centimeters. Now, this is another dramatic effect, So it's the differences, and, it divides the two species into, macro evolution.
Now the folks at home know what's going on at St. Kitts and Nevis. And can we just give a huge round of applause to our ground team? And that's it for today's edition of EVHS News Weekly. Tune in tomorrow to find the shocking case of 8 people dying due to Tylenol. And as we finish, I would like to say thanks to our sponsor, Soberol Industries. And that's a wrap, folks.